Welcome everybody to Platform Shift, what is beyond EHRs, and people are still coming in. I'm going to set the table a little bit, and then I'm going to introduce our panel. And this is something, there's basically two poles in this audience. There's America and Europe. The POVs are quite different. I think the audience is kind of split between the two. And then there's my contacts and Vince's contacts. Vince's contacts will be very familiar with the subject matter and the content and the way it's organized. My contacts will be, I don't do events like this. So it's a little bit different. We're not talking purely abstract. We're not talking about very narrow use cases. We're in between, and we're also looking strategically towards the future. This is something that's well, actually, I'm going to stop there because I want to start introducing our speakers. First, I want to introduce Tumaz. Tumaz is the second person from Better I've had on webinars, and I've met him in the prep meeting. These guys are brilliant. Whenever they talk, light bulbs turn on, and you actually see people leaning forward just a little bit. And I think people from the United States might be very surprised by how much work and how advanced it is and how actually far back it goes. Tomas, did I do a good job of introducing you?
Yeah, thanks, Jose. Thanks for inviting me. I'm doing this for the last 30 years, healthcare IT, 15 years on this concept of platforms. And I'm also the co-chair of OpenEHR Foundation, which is something I'll talk about later on, but really glad to be here.
Thank you. And the next, Girish is very involved in the product development side, and he has butted heads with integrating digital solutions with EHRs. If you heard me talk about EHRs transforming from a system of workflow to a system of record, I'm quoting him and I'm not giving him credit. I'm just been passing it off on my own. Welcome, Girish. Have I done a good job of introducing you?
Absolutely, Jose. Just to add, look, I spent 25 years in healthcare, variety of roles, most of it at GE Healthcare. So like Jose said, I've done a lot of application development, AI, non-AI, operational analytics, clinical workflow type of apps, all of these really trying to bridge the data silos. So firsthand, I've dealt with the siloed data problem, right, that we all struggle with. And look, in my experience, most applications in healthcare fail not because the app themselves are not viable. It's really all about the integration, both on the data side and in the workflow side, right? So that's the reason a lot of these apps fail. So I think I truly believe in this concept of UDHP. In fact, I spent the last decade at GE. We were trying to build our own digital health platform with Edison as well. So I've been part of the platform journey as well as the application journey. So glad to be here.
Thank you. Next one is Jim. Jim is going to show us the American point of view and big enterprise. And he does a lot of work with agents, and not just a solution in the hospital, but everything in the hospitals. Jim, have I introduced you? Is that a ham-fisted introduction?
Sure, of course. Of course. First of all, happy to be here. Jim Sabagal. I'm based in the US, just outside of Philadelphia. I work for a company called CDW, and my focus is on healthcare and the provider segment. I have a background in life sciences. I have an engineering degree. I actually made pharmaceuticals at one point, spent some time with SAP, a variety of other consulting firms. But when I arrived here at CDW from ServiceNow, by the way, it was really a great experience so far for me, because what I'm going to cover in my portion is to talk to you largely about the whole healthcare process from the US perspective, right? And there's some takeaways there for the audience here today. So happy to be here. Happy to be working with these other distinguished panelists. Turn it back over to you, Jose.
Thank you. And Vince is kind of the architect of this webinar, and is a healthcare technology strategist with an eye towards the future. And I think one thing you said to me that I want to add now, it's after we had our webinar prep meeting, you said, I think a lot of people in the United States especially are going to have an aha moment during this event. And I wonder if you could add, have I done a good job of introducing you, Vince?
Sure, thanks. Thanks, Jose. The aha moment, I'll preface, is recognizing the limitations of really a proprietary EHR environment and ecosystem in the US versus a much more open environment in Europe and Australia and other parts of the world. I'll add to my background a little bit that I'm a lawyer by training. I've been in healthcare for 35 plus years. Have worked for 25 plus years as an independent healthcare consultant, and clients have been just about every sector of healthcare, over 150 different organizations I've worked with over the course of my career. So do you want to say more, or should I launch into my introductory overview commentary?
Yeah, I'm going to bring up for. Are you seeing it?
Yeah. Okay. So let me give you a bit of context for this webinar and why it was delayed for 1 month. In March of this year, I and 2 other colleagues wrote a 4,000-word blog post describing the topic of unified digital health platforms, which we will talk about repeatedly. My other colleagues who helped with this were Grish, who is a speaker today, and Jody Rank, who is a longtime friend and colleague. Jody passed away unexpectedly on April 23rd, 5 days before the webinar was scheduled. So I would like to offer just a few moments of silence in Jody's memory and to thank him for his contributions to the world. We miss you, Jody, and thank you for being who you were. So let's start with the problem that we're trying to solve. The healthcare is fragmented, and it's getting worse because of digital innovation, at least in the short to medium term. So if you look at the slide, this is a 30-year framework for platforming healthcare. Before 2008, we had mostly paper, and then fueled by lowest interest rates, tremendous VC interest, we have had an era of point solutions. And there are, according to, I'm trying to remember the source here, Galen Growth and Finn Partners 2023-24, over 14,000 digital health ventures globally. To take that further, Traction cites 4,000 healthcare AI ventures in the US alone. And last week, I read another outstanding, almost unbelievable statistic. Yijin Hardware counts over 11,000 AI companies worldwide in healthcare. So point solutions are problematic. They're not going away, but people don't like to deal with multiple interfaces and multiple contracts, et cetera, et cetera. The next phase, which we're still in, is early digital health platforms, and you recognize this, around functional areas like chronic disease management, like telehealth, like patient engagement solutions, population health. And they begin to bundle different kinds of point solution applications. But from a CIO's point of view, you can still look at a sea of platforms, and it still looks like a lot of point solutions. So today we're going to talk about the next phase, this that we're just beginning to enter. And Gartner estimates we're about 5% of the way through it. I've put into the chat and into the LinkedIn comments references to our blog post and references to the Gartner report that we're going to reference. And invite you to take a look because there's a lot of detail. I'm just going to skim over it. So the fragmentation, we know, healthcare in the U.S., 6,000 hospitals, about 1 million doctors, about 1,000 health insurance companies that offer over 300,000 different health plans. And then you add in pharmacies and physical therapy and home health care, and you can see it becomes a mess, and it doesn't connect very well. We're also referencing the problems with today's electronic health solutions, or I'm sorry, electronic health records, or EHRs. And I'm not going to dwell on it, but they've been well documented over the past decade. Poor user interface and poor experience, error and safety issues, the lack of competition, lack of interoperability, the cost of EHRs. And what this begins to lead to, the fragmentation, EHRs, the beginning of early platforms, is what we refer to as unified digital healthcare platforms, or another way to think about this is the platform of platforms in healthcare that begin to bring all these disparate applications together. There's also a number of environmental trends that drive the movement toward the platform of platforms. The decades-long push towards health IT interoperability and data sharing, the proliferation of healthcare data and the need to somehow unify it, a push towards value-based care and payments, the emergence of AI, the movement toward cloud infrastructure, and then all the new entrants into healthcare, big tech, big retail, and as I mentioned, more than 14,000 digital health companies, which add to the fragmentation again. 350,000 mHealth apps are out there roughly. So I'd also like to refer to the title and explain it a little bit. The title is called Platform Shift, What's Next, or What's Beyond EHRs. And I'm not going to define platform shift, but you're familiar with it because I'm going to give you some examples. In the 70s, we had mainframes, and we moved to a different platform around mini computers. In the 80s, the platform shift was from mini computers to PCs. In the 90s, it was from PCs to the web and the World Wide Web and the internet. In these 00s, from desktop to mobile computing. And in the last decade, we've moved from local computing and hardware much more to the cloud. These are transitions that occur. And we're suggesting that healthcare is entering this type of platform shift. But at the same time, I don't want to imply that EHRs are going to go away tomorrow. And the more likely scenario is that at least for the foreseeable future, they're going to coexist. We also will share with you a little bit later on a list of about 20 what we are referring to again as UDHPs. And you'll notice that 2 of them are existing EHR companies, Epic and Oracle, and there could be others as well too. And they've had incredible expansion plans over the last couple of years. So that's my introduction, and I will allow my colleagues to offer any comments at this point that they may wish to make.
Jim, do you want to
Okay.
crack at the bat?
Yeah. I just want to make 2 points. The first one is Brian put in the Q&A. He's looking for the references you mentioned, Vince. So at some point, I think we just put it here in the chat, if that makes sense.
They're in the chat. So if you look in the chat, you'll find the references.
Okay. So Brian, there's your answers right there. He said he didn't see anything in the chat there. So I don't know. Well, we'll get to that. The one thing I wanted to mention, the adoption of these platforms, it's a race. There's so much changes going on, and when I cover the section and I get into details around a specific platform, there are some things for us to consider, right? Because to your point, Vince, EHRs aren't everything there. They're going to have to be supplemented with other things. So I'm looking forward to Girish's part where he's going to talk about the platform and what Gartner refers to the platform, because he's going to set the tone for Tomas and I as we go through our sections.
Yeah, maybe from my side, I would just add that this shift is much more apparent in other industries. So just like usually with the adoption of technology, healthcare is behind. So we do not see the mega suite surviving in banking or in manufacturing or in commerce. We see it actually shrinking, and this is not yet happening in healthcare. And I think this is something we'll talk about later on.
Yeah, and the only other thing I'd add, and I'll go deeper into my section here, is really more like today's EHRs were designed for a certain purpose, right? And then over time, they've been kind of expanding, although they weren't originally designed for that intent. So the healthcare today is so different than what it used to be, like value-based care, digital front doors, hybrid care models, right? You think of all those kinds of things, those weren't really the use cases the EHRs were originally designed for. And that's why I think UDHPs, in general, they're just going to offer a more adaptive architecture, right, for where things are going in healthcare and how to adapt and scale with it.
And Girish, you're going to walk us through the value proposition.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about what UDHP or Unified Digital Health Platform really is, right? And why it's such a timely shift in how we think about health tech in general, right? So I think let me start with like a simple framing. So I referred to earlier, today, just in general, healthcare is so fragmented, right? You got like EHRs managing clinical records, you have CRM tools for patient outreach, you have remote patient monitoring devices like RPM devices that are generating all kinds of patient data. And a lot of these are outside the hospital as well, right? And then you have a variety of AI solutions over the last 4 or 5 years that has proliferated, and most of these are sitting on the side, right? And none of these really talk to each other that well, right? They all try to make an attempt, but the integration is always clumsy end of the day. And that's what leads to the experience, right? Or the inefficiencies essentially in care delivery. And I think that all this creates kind of what we call as the friction, right? Friction both for providers, for patients, and for everyone involved in general for the care. Now, I think if you think about what UDHP tries to do, Vince mentioned this kind of word like platform of platforms. That's really kind of how we think about it. And it tries to solve this kind of fragmented approach by creating this platform of many platforms, right, together. And it basically acts in that capacity. They don't replace your EHR, or in fact, it doesn't necessarily replace anything. It just, they try to sit on top as a layer, orchestrate across everything that exists, and tries to connect everything together, right? And these platforms sit above the legacy system. So if you look at the reference architecture that you see on the page that Gartner came up with, I think it tries to do a good job of explaining, right? At the bottom, you see all your existing data stores, right? System of records, essentially, including the EHR, CRMs, right? All kinds of things are there. And then comes that whole platform layer, and it sits above these legacy systems and provide a unified kind of digital layer to manage workflows, data, patient engagement, right? And add intelligence into this whole process, essentially. And I think if you look at some of the core capabilities highlighted there, it gets into all kinds of things, right? Orchestration is a huge part of it. Data fabric, I think it's kind of the glue, because ultimately the value any of these platforms bring is not just access to data, but also the enrichment of the data, right? Curation of the data, bringing together the siloed pieces in a given context so that the applications can derive value faster and easier, right? Without having to redo it at each application again and again. And I think that's really kind of goal behind these DHPs and UDHPs, essentially. And then the AI tooling sits kind of on top of all of this, right, as part of that whole IT infrastructure. And there's not just one way to build these UDHPs, right? So if we go to the next page, Jose, you're going to see the list that Vince was referring to. So Gartner has come up with a current list of UDHP candidates. We added some more on the right side here. And of course, Jim and Thomas are going to cover some of at least they represent two of the companies, right, that are in these lists here. But if you just step back and look at some of the players here, everybody kind of starts in a certain way, thinking about certain use cases, and then evolve into a platform that can do so much more. And I think that's the natural kind of extension we tend to see in the UDHP space. Now, there are, of course, the big tech players like AWS with Health Lake, right? So they take a slightly different approach coming into this. But I think ultimately, if you really step back and think about why these platforms matter and what value they unlock, in my mind, there is 3 or 4 things, right? First, they unify fragmented workflows, both across clinical and operational domains, right? Things like patient intake, patient scheduling, follow-ups, right? Care coordination, and trying to kind of make sure you're complying with the guidelines, right? All these things, prior auth, all these can be coordinated in one place. Second, right, they can make the clinician experience much, much more manageable and easier, right? Much better than what it is today. And don't just think fewer clicks, logins, those kinds of things, but really from a patient care standpoint, getting access to the relevant data at the point of care, right? So think of a world where without having to go through 10 different pages in the EMR, they get access to lab reports, pathology studies that might have happened for the patient in the context of the current imaging study they're looking at, right? All at the point of care so that they can make a better decision, right? And the AI tools corresponding to that particular workflow as well. And then third, I think in general, they're just going to make it much easier to plug in innovation, right? And healthcare, we always get the rap for being slower than other industries, rightfully, right? It is an evidence-based industry and it takes time. But part of the problem is also the constraints we have put on ourselves, right? In terms of being able to integrate easily and being able to adopt the innovation that's happening in the market. So I think with this type of a UDHP approach, it's in general going to make it a lot easier for providers to plug in innovation, and it's going to make it easier for the application companies to deploy their innovation as well, right? So you don't have to redo this pipeline connectivity back into the EMR or other data sources again and again and again. Instead, you're trying to leverage that enriched data straight from that UDHP layer itself. And finally, they just shift kind of the foundation itself, right? So from EHRs, which today essentially are systems of record, right? So they'll kind of get relegated to more of that. And the workflow, the systems of intelligence and action will really start getting layered up into the UDHP and the applications, right, itself. And that's kind of the transition we'll see over time as this whole space gets more matured, I think. So I'll stop there for now, and I'm looking forward to building more on this in the group discussion later on as well.
Yeah, I'll comment. Healthcare is huge, and it's 18% of GDP in the U.S., about half of that in other developed countries. And one thing that's unclear in the crystal ball, healthcare is big enough that there may be sector specific. UDHPs, pharma, perhaps medical device, long-term care, radiology. It may not be one platform. It may be different platforms for different sectors. We'll see.
Yeah, I would just add that one of the differences, which is maybe not apparent immediately, is that the data aspect is way different than other industries. It's not only the complexity of the data, but the need to keep the data for the lifetime of the patient is way different from other industries. In telecoms, 5-year-old data, not really important anymore. Here, you need to keep data for 100 years. So this changes a lot of things in the architectures that we need to deploy.
Okay, I think we're going. Jim, do you want to have a word?
No, I'm ready to get started. Girish, thank you very much. You've actually teed me up quite nicely. Um, Now that I listen to you and you kind of go through everything. So let's begin. Okay. All right. So for those of you that don't know CDW, we've been in existence as a hardware vendor since 1980s. And we've grown into a company that provides, if you will, services across multiple industries. And so the area that we're talking today, certainly about healthcare, is one of our largest groups within the company itself. Go to the next slide, please. So I'd like to begin our discussion just by reframing everyone's attention here. The idea that we're all here to improve patient care. At the end of the day, that's really what we're trying to do. And this photograph tells me a number of things. I'll share my thoughts with you. Number one, there's a son here who's interested in his father's health. So he's accompanying him to get his medical treatment. However, the clinician, she's staring at her laptop and she's entering notes and information. We mentioned EHRs, by the way. There's a number of systems around this. And the reason I bring this up is because typically this is the experience that we see in the US-based healthcare. Maybe the same in Europe, but I don't know, right? I'm based in the US. And I would ask you if this is something that you've experienced, right? So when you think about a loved one, when you think about your child, your grandparents, you think about a friend coming in for healthcare, this is a common scene. Let's go to the next slide. To expand upon what Girish had talked about, my opinion here is that you follow this kind of a process. Now, US healthcare is different from, let's say, government-run healthcare. Even our cousins up in Canada have a different process. But in the US, we go from left to right. And in the previous page, you know, that gentleman might be in the diagnosis phase of this entire process. Okay? This happens every single day in hospitals across the United States. Let's go to the next slide. If you take that same experience 2 slides ago, you multiply that by the population of folks in the United States, you multiply that by the number of clinics and specialty hospitals, you see the dilemma. The infrastructure that's being required here not only has to support the EHR for gathering all this information, we have a payment system in the United States. We get paid, it used to be one way, now we have to get paid for value. What does that mean? That means that there are technicians that code the accounts. It gets sent off for payment with insurance companies. This happens daily. All of this occurs on a daily basis. You heard Vince talk about 6,200 hospitals across the United States, in rural areas, in urban areas, which is kind of where I live, right? In 10 kilometers to the east or the west, I've run into one hospital system. So I'm fortunate that way. There are others who have to travel hours to get the health care. Now, what do we do as a company, and why do we have an opinion on this? Go ahead to the next slide. What we do from a CDW perspective is we create simulations of hospital systems. Now, it's not just the EMR. Let's say you're the clinician. The device that you're using in the operating room fails. How do you replace it? How do you fix that? That to us is a problem. How about a nurse who can't find a ventilator on her floor? It may be somewhere in the building. How do you respond to that? Hospitals do this on a daily basis. They'll either use email, pagers, phones, all sorts of things. And we simulate this to show how technology can be leveraged across this network here, where patients are coming in on a daily basis and leaving the hospital systems. So there's a whole need for integration within the platform, again, that Girish had pointed to. Now, where does the EMR fit, and where does one of the platforms called ServiceNow fits? Let's go to the next slide. So there are 2 key differentiators in this graphic that you're looking at. Number 1, it has to do with architecture and data. The platform from ServiceNow does not hold any data. It basically will take all the information from the systems of record that you see along the bottom of this slide, right? Let me just pick one out here. Let's say Oracle, or you see Epic or Cerner. We'll use that information as it relates to a patient record so we can accomplish something. Maybe it's billing, maybe it's patient records that have to be updated. Maybe a patient calls in and says, hey, I want to see my bill, those kinds of things. So the ServiceNow platform does this on a daily basis. The second thing, it does parallel processing. What do I mean by that? You see along the top, there are multiple actors here going on right now. Everything from devices on the right, which I referenced earlier, to home health. Well, Jim, what does that mean, home health? An extension of a hospital could be that the patient goes all the way out for rehabilitation in another facility. You need to track that. You need to maintain that. You need to transfer data to that other system. And in the middle, we create out-of-the-box workflows so that if you have a workflow as a hospital organization, you can leverage these without any kind of coding that's necessary. The platform, from a parallel perspective, also looks at tasks. It looks at these tasks and say, do I need that resource? Is this thing completed? Do I need to alert somebody? Think of another example, patient discharge. When the EMR system says you are allowed to leave, there's a whole series of activities that happen, and you don't see this. What happens is the EMR kicks off a message because the clinician signs off on it. The nurse has to take the paperwork down to a different location. Groups from environmental, from devices, from cleaning, all have to be engaged so they can turn the room around and get ready for the next patient. Those are examples of workflows. There are multiple systems that are now being integrated together so that you can enact a particular thing called, in this case, a discharge of a patient. And we have many examples that CDW works with. We not only work with the ServiceNow platform, we also work with other areas, other systems, other HR systems, ERP systems. And again, the platform allows us to integrate everything together, take the necessary data, not storing it, of course, and then pushing it off to have a decision being made or an activity being done. Okay, that's my portion of it. I want to turn it over to, I think it's Tomas.
Yeah.
He's up next.
And by the way, just before we bring on Tomas, I just want to say CDW does great events. If you go to their homepage on LinkedIn, you can see the plays.
Thank you.
And welcome, Tomas. And I've
Yeah.
actually did one of your webinars last year. You probably didn't, but it was brilliant. And I wonder if you can show us a European POV, and I'm going to bring up your slides, which is very, very different.
So Jurish talked about two levels of integration. One is data and the other is process. And I think Jim really had a nice overview of how the process needs to be integrated. We as a company focus a little bit more on the data side. So if you can go to the next slide. Just one slide about our company. We are a relatively small company, but we work with 120 healthcare organizations, mostly in Europe, across Europe, but among them are many national systems like Greece, Ireland, Malta, Slovenia, Catalonia, and Wales, but also some top university hospitals like Karolinska, which I'll talk about later, and Basel, Zurich. So some really top-end institutions which have decided to look at it a little bit differently or go to the next step by focusing on the data first. So if you go to the next slide. I talked about the difference of data in healthcare, and I think it's really important to understand this difference to other industries, because you start thinking about architecture differently if you understand that the data is your core asset. And now with AI, of course, this has been even more obvious, but even before, the data you accumulate around a patient, around your processes, are basically the core value that IT provides to a provider. So if you go to the next slide. the core problem, of course, that is causing all these interoperability issues is that each application stores data differently. Again, it's true in all industries, but in healthcare, because of what I said before, it's a much bigger problem because this accumulates over time. And as you change applications, what happens with the data? Now, if you go to the next slide. So the data is stuck in the silos of the applications that are managing this data. And the next slide. The good news is we've solved this problem for imaging 30 years ago. And you don't realize this, but imaging is actually one of the more innovative parts of healthcare IT because of this issue that actually any modality and any application can access the same image. This is kind of true with documents if you think about a PDF, but it's definitely not true with the structured data, the data that, of course, we need to make decisions, and of course, we need it to fuel the AI. So pulling that data out in the next slide is actually what we as a company are focusing on. And to do this, we use something called OpenEHR, which is a standard to manage clinical data. So next slide. The architecture of the future, as defined here by EY, is that data becomes central. It's a little bit different than in the Gartner slide, but the same idea: separation of data, of applications, and of the user experience, going from silos to a data layer that is accessed by AI, by algorithms, by applications, devices, and obviously users. Next slide. Next. So the question becomes obviously, oh, if you go back, the question becomes obviously, what is that data standard? And this is a quote from EY, which says that actually there's only one that is specifically designed for persisting data, and that is open, obviously, and vendor neutral, which is a requirement if we want many applications to speak to the same data. And that is OpenEHR. And next slide. I don't have much time to explain, but OpenEHR is basically a set of specifications. It was started in Europe by some Australians 25 years ago. But it's now really gaining traction where we have quite a number of countries, especially the Nordics, the most advanced health systems, defining OpenEHR as the standard data model for the country. Now, one of the things that I will say is that a big difference with OpenEHR is that it actually separates what clinicians do, which is develop clinical data models, and what IT experts do, which is build software based on these clinical data models. And if you go to the next slide. And I'm really happy that this community is expanding quickly. We have clinicians modeling data, about 5,000 of them across 100 countries. And it's really great to see because all of these data models are free to use for anybody. Obviously, they need to be translated. Most of them are done in English first. But we really have an active community that is building these data models. And of course, the premise is to make sure the data is in the right format with the right validation and right terminologies from capture to use. And this, of course, is the end goal. In between, we need to take the data that we can and try to map it into the vendor neutral structures. Next. So, obvious question, how do these standards play together? OpenEHR focusing on persistence, FHIR and the HL7 world were focusing on exchange, and of course all of them underpinned by terminologies like LOINC and SNOMED. So they do play together, but obviously you need different standards for different purposes. Next. And this is a quote, prediction by Gartner, very timely for our talk here, is that they do see that the future, near future, actually, they see CIOs deploying the digital health platforms for the new initiatives that they have. Obviously, legacy is incredibly hard to replace in healthcare, but the new initiatives are going down this path. Next. And I just am showing this slide where Gartner mapped our capabilities onto the same architecture that was explained before. And we provide most of the components that Gartner describes and use third parties for some of them. But the core is the data layer based on OpenEHR and FHIR for demographic data. Then a set of components which enable you to assemble a user experience using the low-code tools in the composition layer, and thus covering many different use cases either by ourselves or through our partners. If you go to the next slide. So I'd like to finish with two examples. One is the #1 hospital in Europe, Karolinska in Stockholm. So they have an existing EHR, which is long in the tooth, 25 years old. They're trying to move to something new, but in the process, they're moving all the data into a digital health platform and requesting from the new vendor to actually use that data directly and actually also use the applications, the forms produced by the digital health platform inside their end user environment. So this is a very recent example. We have a few more, like I mentioned, Zurich and Basel. But of course, being the #1 hospital in Europe, this is quite important for the market to see that this is the way to go, because as you know, healthcare is quite risk averse. And the last one, a little bit, next slide, please. A very different use case. No, sorry, one back. Very different use case where the City of London, with the entire complexity of 40 huge healthcare systems, 1,400 GPs, and about 10 million citizens, had this problem of coordinating care across the city. And actually, the solution we provided was putting a digital health platform in the center, developing the care plans, and embedding them into existing solutions like Cerner, Epic, the primary care systems that are used, community health, even ambulance services, care homes, and the patient through something they call the NHS app. So everybody on the same page, everybody updated at the same time, and the ability to launch new care plans. We're now doing sickle cell, dementia, frailty, end of life, working next on diabetes, anything or diseases or chronic diseases that are managed between the healthcare providers, which is obviously very common. And I'll stop here, and more than happy to answer questions later on.
I want to break the rule and actually make a comment here. This is where the data layer in the US is largely missing. That's the aha moment I hope people in the US are going to be able to have. What we have as a sort of equivalent is the US core data for interoperability, which is at version 4. And there are roughly 120 data elements in that standardized set. I listened to a webinar of Judy Faulkner, the CEO of Epic, and her comment was that there are 150,000 data elements in the Epic EHR. I mean, we're just barely scratching the surface. That's my comment.
And you know that, if you don't give the AI enough data, it's not going to make the right decisions, right? So it really is about, OpenEHR is about all the data, not a subset, because we understand that, today's technology can actually make use of all the data.
So Neil Jennings has a great question in here, and I was going to answer it, but I figured I'd bring this up here. And his question is, could the US practically adopt OpenEHR as a requirement, or would incumbent EHRs block regulations with their lobbying? To me, this is a great question, because what Tomas is sharing with us is the fact that you want to have that interoperability across multiple systems. So I'll give you a personal example. This is a personal example. I mentioned before that there are 2 hospital systems to the east or the west of me. They're on 2 completely different EHR systems. And because of that, it causes me personally problems in terms of interoperability. I take a blood test. I now want to submit it into one or the other. They don't share. They don't see these things. And it's not like Girish, that they're really far apart, right? It's not like a rural health application here. We're talking a short distance, and yet they don't talk to each other. Right. There will come a point with the cost of healthcare in the United States, because I can't cover the EU, where it's going to be unsustainable. And if there is a way to lower that cost, it is going to be through productivity means. It's going to be through cost savings. And I don't know if, in my opinion, whether data is going to make that difference. You're going to get hospitals competing with each other because they do today. It's a very capital intense environment, Tomas. It's not like Europe where, one hospital services a whole country. One system, I should say, services a whole country. We don't have that in the US. If I move from Pennsylvania to California, it's a completely different system. I have to drag all my data with me to the other side of the country, and I'm dealing with a completely different set of systems.
Yeah.
So we're not homogeneous from that perspective, and that might be the answer to your question, Neil. I don't know
just a comment.
how that would work.
It's not like that in Europe either. So there's a few examples, smaller countries, but in big countries you have the same problem, even within the same healthcare system. So the practical approach is what London did. So narrow it down to a city, to a region for the big countries. You cannot do this across a US or even across Germany, for instance, at the moment. But you can do it in a region, and regionally, you can estimate that probably 90% of your care is within your region, right? So it would be a huge benefit just to solve this problem. But going nationally, except in small countries, that's a tall order.
Yeah, tough. Girish, I don't know. What do you think from your perspective?
Look, it's hard in the US, right? When the investment the providers have made in the market dominating EHRs like Epic and Oracle, it's a tough economic value proposition, right? To break out of it, because they've already spent, like, it's not uncommon to hear $1 billion annual payments for these vendors. So how do you break out of it, right? So that's why I almost think the way this evolves is two things, right? One, when clinicians start seeing those really powerful applications that can help them deliver care to patients, and the initial ones are going to be hard to implement, expensive to implement, but the benefit will be felt, which will start creating that momentum, right? The second is going to be these platforms are going to be layers on top of the EHRs, right? And that's how it'll start off, because you can't just, for many different reasons, you can't rip and replace any of these things, right? So it's going to start as layers, and then over the next decade, right, when these things get adopted, the role of the EHR will start shrinking down into more of a system of record, right? And that'll happen over time, right?
And the motivation is, the reason it's hard to change is because it's a business model change. It's not a technical question, right? So what you don't want is people competing on data models and locking customers in. Actually, you want them to compete on applications. And hope the smart way would be not to let them compete on data. So some countries have done this. Norway is quite advanced in this way. Catalonia is doing this. They just have a tender out for a national in their case means Catalan platform, which will be the basis all vendors need to connect with. But this is leading edge at the moment, obviously.
And just to echo Thomas's point, right? Because I had the opportunity to work globally across many different countries, and the smaller countries that are pushing towards national health systems, kind of integrated data, right? Those are the ones that tend to lead the way, because they have the incentives, the right kind of incentives in place to make it happen. Establish the right data model as kind of the first step, right, to facilitate this whole thing. And to your point, Jim, US is complete opposite right now, the way things are set up, right? All types of incentives really don't support it at this point, unfortunately.
I think it's hard to say one way or the other. It's great that a region like Norway, with a population of 5 million people, can actually do that, right? That's envious, right? But if you take New York City, which has a population of 10 million, in that population, there's like 20 different systems in there. And so it creates an issue of cost. I get back to cost again. These hospitals have to operate in such a way that they can make affordable healthcare, right? In the US, we hear this all the time. So depending on where you live, depending on your means, this is how you end up getting healthcare. This is why I put that diagram in there, because they actually have to streamline that process, Tomas. They have to make that easy to get enough people through the system so that they can pay for all of these technical systems. Now, there's no competition between systems, right? At least not yet. And my observation in the US is that they've been acquiring other hospitals, right? Why are there only two to the east and the west of me? That's because the other 6 hospitals have been acquired. They all now report into a larger group of hospitals that are standardizing on one technology versus another with the same end goal, which is patient care.
Yeah, fully agree.
Yeah.
We got a lot of questions in
Yeah, a lot of questions. Did you want to read them off there, Jose?
Are there any platforms you think are doing a good job with collecting patient-reported outcome measures? By the way, before we go to this question, in 9 minutes, we start the after party, and we're bringing on members of the audience onto the stage. So are there any platforms that you think are good job with collecting patient-reported outcome measures? Tomas, do you want to take this?
Well, I know a few in Europe, and actually the patient-reported outcomes are questionnaires, which means it's a relatively simple problem to solve compared to the rest of healthcare IT and data. So I mean, each country has one. I don't know if there's one that goes pan-Europe, to be honest, but a lot of them are home-built as well. Governments build them because they want benchmarking between the healthcare providers, so they're quite interested in doing this nationally. And of course, it's hard to have value-based care if you don't have this. So I'm pretty sure Denmark does a good job, like with most things, and I couldn't name a product, to be honest.
I've got a question I want to give.
That's a bigger question there, Jose, is, patient-reported outcomes, the concept is great, right? It's absolutely necessary, but the challenge is how do you harmonize that data, right? That comes into the system. It's not about just accessing the data. It's really about putting the right context behind the data. Because personally, I go through this. I see my parents fill out these, surveys every 2 weeks coming from their hospital. And it's just like the questions are so vague, right? And they don't know how to respond. So we all live through this, right? So, and then if you think about an AI application trying to collate all this data and try to use this, it's garbage in, garbage out, essentially, right?
It's almost like the number of stars in an Uber ride, right?
Yeah, absolutely. What else do we have, Jose?
There's a question. What about data storage capacity when you add NGS/WGS and imaging files, CT, MRI, to the health record?
I'll take that one. That's a great question because most hospitals are now cloud-based, and the way data is segmented, right? I may have mentioned to you, well, I don't know if I told this example. When you use the platform like ServiceNow and you connect to a variety of these point solutions, right? I've got imaging in one system, I've got other kinds of information in different systems. It is incumbent on the platform to basically pull all this information together at the request of the clinician. So when these images start to get larger and larger, when this inevitably happens, this is where the hyperscalers take into effect, right? Where they can actually add capacity as necessary. And the biggest thing you have to watch out for is 2 things. One is security, right? Make sure the data is encrypted. And secondly, the ability for you to manage those costs as they get larger and larger. What is your default when your system goes down, and where do you store that information? So most hospital organizations, in my experience, have already tackled this. They kind of know how that works. And platforms like ServiceNow can actually collect data from various things for a given patient. There's actually a workflow that you put your name in, and then it goes out and grabs all your records for the last 10 years, pulls it into the clinician, which is why the clinician is always 10 to 15 minutes late for my appointment, because he's reading my background information that he's collected from his EHR system before seeing me, right? That's basically where this time comes into play. Good question, though. Hopefully I answered that.
We had a lot of questions.
That's good. Keep going.
And in creating the big data, you solve the data integration issue, but big data creates big problems at the provider level. As a provider, I'm not looking for the Pacific Ocean of data. I'm looking for that's a comment. I'm looking for the pearl in the oyster. I'll just Brian and
maybe you could talk to Barry about that one, and then kind of ask him. Garish mentioned AI agents because that's what we're working on right now. sift through all this data, summarize everything for me, and then serve it up so that the clinician can look at that and say, for Jim the patient, this is his history for the last 10 years, and I'm going to make a diagnosis based on that. Whereas before,
Right.
there was a lot of reading going on.
And I think the
I'll
answer to
add
the
to
question
that.
really is
I
like
think
Jim says, right? Sorry, go ahead, Vince.
that the AI, my comment is that AI capabilities, I expect, will be a major differentiator among different UDHPs.
Wow.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think the data piece, look, the question was big providers, don't know what to do with big data. It causes problems, right? And they shouldn't really care about that at all, right?
Yeah.
The big data, the providers is really about solving the clinical care delivery for the patient, and that comes through the applications, right? And the applications are going to embrace AI, which will make use of that big data, which provided by the UDHPs in a much more consistent, open, interoperable way, right? Which helps build those applications, deploy those applications. But end of the day, for the providers, the only thing that matters is better applications that are easier, faster, cheaper to deploy, and gives better experience for clinicians and the patients, right?
So let me ask this question, Tomas, from your perspective, is there, I know I have an opinion on the US side of things and basically what's going on here, but what happens in Europe for AI adoption? Is that readily being taken into account on the applications that you guys are looking at from the Open EHR?
Yeah, obviously, but as most things in Europe, we sometimes shoot ourselves in the foot with regulation, right? So right now there's hopefully a review of the both the GDPR and the AI Act because they are quite restrictive, and this is a bottleneck. The MDR directive as well. How are you going to make AI algorithms comply with MDR? There's a lot of so I would say most of the AI today is used in pilots. I mean, obviously there's speech recognition and stuff like that. That's different, or transcripting. That's not really, specific to healthcare. There's ambient and stuff like that. That's all good. But in terms of insights on or agents or things like this, what I see is that people are figuring it out. I mean, it's moving really fast, as you know. It's incredibly fast. So what we're doing as a company, we're trying to introduce that into the software development process. So helping people assemble and develop applications quicker and lowering the barrier or the learning curve of this new tech, which is a little bit of a issue at the moment because it's a different way of building applications. And then the third part would be actually to provide insights based on data for clinical care. And here we're obviously very careful.
Yeah. So far here in the US, AI has been adopted quite well. There are legal issues in terms of, and you can imagine this, right? I am Garish's doctor. I take the AI agent, I make a recommendation, I give it to him, but something goes wrong, right? Who's liable in that particular scenario? We don't know. But some of the blocking and tackling in the data healthcare platform is what we're looking at. Our company is looking at those ways we can remove manual processes. That's something you can do in AI today, right? Because now the big thing for the US market is that everybody has an AI agent. And because everybody has an AI agent, I happen to have the best AI agent. And you have to really discern which is going to basically help me. So I go back to, does it improve productivity and does it reduce costs? Because if it answers those two things, then that's the one that I want. But I have 10 choices, right? That kind of thing. So,
so I think
early stages and wow, really
for me, the low-hanging fruit is where the clinician doesn't see the patient. So if you think about radiology, reading images, the computer and AI has just as much information as the radiologist, right? Where the patient and clinician interact, I think the AI is obviously at a disadvantage. They cannot get all the information that the clinician just by looking at the patient discerns, right? But lab results and stuff you make, like I said, radiology where it's disconnected. So the same information, I'm pretty sure that's where the AI is well, a no-brainer.
Yeah.
Gentlemen, I don't want to burden you. We're going to go to the after party. You know, I've got a feeling we may not get to all the questions in the time we have, but I'm gonna have a record of all of them, and perhaps if some people slip through the cracks, I can forward questions to some of the speakers by email and get back. A comment from Brian. We actually covered this in a webinar 2 webinars ago about I agree that patient ownership and control of their data has value, but we shouldn't assume that it is automatically patient-centric. Not all patients will benefit from that. For some, it would potentially create more harm, and it puts the onus on patients and caregivers that do not always have the resource to do anything useful with it. And I would, did you want to say something, Vince? No.
Yeah, I'll tackle that, and I'm going to tackle a number of other questions at the same time. What I'm hearing is a lot of questions about will UDHPs or what do we have this kind of capability? And by definition, a UDHP is a platform. And the way this ecosystem is evolving, there are applications that will be plugging into these platforms. The UDHPs themselves do not need to develop each of these applications. So, you know, the analogy, I think, is the evolution of the smartphone system, where in 2006, we had a dozen different operating systems for your phone. And by 2015, Apple iOS and Google Android had captured 99% of the marketplace. And much of the reason for that is because they had 2 million plus applications that sat on their platforms. And a lot of the value of these of what these capabilities are come from the different applications. And to take that even a step further, that you can envision this as a developer war, that you know, we put up a list of 20 different UDHPs. That list is likely to shrink, and one of the reasons that is not the only reason, but I think a big one is who can attract the most and the best developers.
You don't think there's like a there was a question in the chat here that I answered, which is largely to do with in the US market, there doesn't seem to be one player who's going to win everything, right? It's never going to do that because there's such of the 6,000 hospitals that we have, there's a certain stratus, right? There's stratification. You know, you have the very large hospital systems, you know, 120 locations, hundreds of thousands of employees, that kind of stuff, all the way down to regional kinds of health systems. And so the UDHs would be different. They're going to be different vendors, and they'll stay in business as long as hospitals can afford to keep them in business, right? And they keep making changes to it. So there's not going to be one that kind of takes over everything. It's not like with adoption of Open EHR, and correct me if I'm wrong, Tomas, that, you know, there is a possibility there that, you know, you could get unification around the way data is managed, and therefore you have one EHR as opposed to we have 5, right? 5 different systems.
Yeah, again, it's very similar to the imaging world, right? It's not perfect. There's some little things you have to take into account, but it's way better than what was there before, right? So it's much easier to understand the data from both systems if you base it on the common data models and terminologies, obviously.
Jose, you're muted.
Question by Epic. I think actually, Vince, isn't Epic effectively moving from an EHR to unified data UDHP, given its dominance, especially in the larger health systems?
Yes, and Oracle Health, the new EHR from Oracle, I think if you look at it carefully, much of what they're having their design looks more like a UDHP than a traditional EHR. So I will give you a foreshadowing. Another colleague and I, Neil Jennings, have a another blog in the works examining the likelihood of EHRs becoming UDHPs. And I think you can make strong arguments both ways. And we'll lay that out in an extensive blog post. But I think certainly they are contenders very much for this next level of platform, but they're going to look very different than they looked in the past.
It would be, I have to disagree, because the kinds of systems that hospitals are doing, and when I talk to executives at hospitals, and they may have hundreds of applications, but they basically settle on 4. They have the EHR, which is Epic or Cerner, right? Then they have some kind of a financial tool. They have an ERP system, and they have a platform. And that platform has to support all the other 3 systems. So unless Epic or Cerner are going to move into that, or Oracle going to move into that space of basically replacing ERP systems, financial systems, and those kinds of things, I find it very difficult for them to kind of do everything. Now, can they manage to do workflows together in there? Could be, potentially. That's a lot of work. And then you have to think about, how would you maintain that, right?
And I think the reality is they will pivot. The market is going to push them, so they will pivot to a certain extent. But again, the incentives and their technology architecture is set up to become a true UDHP. So there's going to be different flavors of it, right?
Yeah.
So they'll make an attempt between the legal requirements on open data sharing, all that kind of stuff that's kind of evolving, and the direction in which kind of the industry technology is going. They will make some changes, but I don't think they'll ever be a UDHP designed to be an UDHP, right? So it's more of a
ServiceNow, because of, and everybody knows this, right? I mean, patient information is critical. There's a whole conversation on security that we can talk about, but it doesn't store any data on the platform. It just moves things around, right? It takes information from the left, moves it to the right. Now, will an Epic be able to do that, right? And to your point, Girish, how do you maintain that? Because the workflow construct, the way it's been deployed around the world, is there's a whole mass of folks that actually know how to do this very rapid, very quickly. So I think if you look at the players that are trying to be, their UDH vendors versus EMR vendors, they're trying to play nice with each other, because business has to be conducted in such a way that I can integrate into Epic and Epic can integrate into the platform, and vice versa. That's, I would think, the direction of how it's going to go.
Good luck.
And I don't even know if ServiceNow would be the platform at the moment, because again, we work with it a lot. It's adopted quite frequently in US hospitals. So how would you dislodge that? That would be the other way to look at it. I made a lot of investments in this, right?
You can't dislodge it.
And to comment on that, Jim.
Yeah, go ahead.
Epic announced at HIMSS that they're building an ERP. And if you look at the capabilities that are described in Oracle Health's new EHR, they talk about pulling together data from all these sources. So I'm not making a statement one way or the other. I'm saying there are good arguments for and against the idea of, I think, EHRs taking on this broader role. At least that's my perspective.
Yeah. I think the intent might be there. Again, I can't wait to read it.
Yeah.
The challenge always, look, if you spend time in big companies with multiple products priorities, right? Ultimately, it always becomes a question of where are you going to focus? And when you have this huge install base of customers that are using your system as EHR, you have to continue supporting them. And at some point, although your intent might be to pivot over time, that's always going to be the lower priority, right? So because you have to do what you have to do to keep your customers going meanwhile. So which is all the reasons I think, I don't think the existing EMR players are going to become the UDHP of choice, right? So it's just not set up that way for a variety of different reasons. And to Vince's point, they're all going to try to do this, no question, right? So otherwise, they're not even trying to meet the needs of the evolving healthcare.
Yeah,
but it's the question of who's going to be successful, how quickly, right?
But I can tell you that at least in the Europe implementations, most of the Epic customers are really trying to get as much data out as possible. So the Dutch hospitals, 3 or 4 that have Epic, have big programs on how to pull everything out. So there's one, I think the last one, Maastricht, actually has it in the contract that they can get everything out, which is not self-evident with others. I think a lot of the others are struggling to even contractually do that. But Helsinki, for instance, has basically a 50 million a year project just taking data out of Epic and building a data platform basically on Azure. So everybody I talk to would really like to have that data outside because they have struggled to build on top of Epic APIs. And of course, it wouldn't be natural that one company would have all the innovation in this world, right? So obviously, they will have to use other applications, and blocking that is, well, it seems to be a good business model now, but hopefully in the future it will not be, right?
I think that might be a good point to go to Ryan's question. I'd be curious of the panel's opinion about the recent lawsuit against Epic for denying data access to third-party vendors, or the recent court filing in favor of provider authorized access, point-click care versus real-time medical systems. How are these new legal precedents reshaping the conversation around innovation and data access? Do you want to answer that question, Vince?
I think it is one of the arguments suggesting that Epic is going to struggle becoming a UDHP. They're already being hit by other vendors on antitrust issues and data hoarding issues. And I wouldn't be surprised to see the government get into it. But that's got to be a major factor, or at least if I were them, I would be thinking, the bigger we get, we're going to be attracting more scrutiny and losing lawsuits. I think that's my perspective.
And Vince, you're correct regarding Oracle and their aggressive posture, ERP, CRM, EHR integration, part of their strategy after they purchased Cerner. And that's a comment, not a question. I'm trying to catch up with all the questions we missed, actually. I know a bunch of them came.
Yeah, the questions are kind of overwhelming, which is very gratifying, but it's also overwhelming.
While you're looking at some of those questions to address the Oracle piece, Cerner used to have what they call managed services, which is an EHR company that's actually doing what the ServiceNow platform does, which is managing all the other ancillary systems. And to Girish's point, they are no longer in that managed services domain because they found that it was too difficult for them. So outside of the EHR, when we talk about plant maintenance, when we talk about ERP, supply chain, financial kinds of systems, and Cerner didn't have that, their customers were let down. And how do we know that? Because they ended up replacing the managed services and now buying an ERP system and all these other things because they need to run the hospital organization. They have to have the right kinds of financials and supply chain. So they'll go to Workday. They'll use them also for human resources kinds of things, hiring clinicians and nurses. So Girish has a good point. They don't want to stray too far away because if they do, they're just not going to be successful in that kind of thing. And so they're out of that business. We know we're looking at a lot of those accounts right now.
I got a question from Ian. Should the UDHP ever have a system of record capacity as per the London Universal Care Plan, or is a UDHP always just a secondary extract?
Now I can weigh in on this. I'm sure, Thomas, you have your real life views on this too, but there's enough system of records today, right? The data is already kind of spread out. UDHPs are going to have their own storage, but it'll be transient in nature, right? It's meant to aggregate data, so you're still going to have to keep that available to the applications without having to do it on the fly again and again. But it's never intended to be a system of record. The system of record will be, right, what is there today, right? That's the only way to do the architecture right. Otherwise, you're going to just end up duplicating data and causing even more challenges down the
I would
line.
disagree with you on this. So I fully agree about legacy. That's the only way to do it. But when you're building a new application, why would you recreate the same problem you're solving with the UDHP?
If you're starting, absolutely, I'm with you. I'm with you. I think if you're starting from scratch, you would approach it differently, no question at all.
Yeah.
But in most cases in real life, you're going to have to deal with legacy, right? So
Well,
I think
you
that's where
will,
the
but that's
architecture
only
has
part
to
of
be
the
flexible.
problem, right? That's only part of the problem. I mean, you will be building new stuff. I mean, hopefully we'll get new applications. I mean, God knows the ones we're looking at are 20 years old plus, right? Most of them. So there will be new applications. The question is, should they be built on a UDHP? And I think yes, right? And once that happens, it will become a system of record as well.
And
Just
so in the
just to be
long
clear,
run,
I think they were saying the UDHP being the system of record.
Well,
Girish,
I mean,
I hear that question and I go, it's not a system of record. It's
well,
not an epic.
think about there is a tender out now in Catalonia where they will actually build the UDHP or buy the UDHP and a lot of services around to create an ecosystem. And they will request everybody that is bidding on anything in that health system to go through that so that the record is consistent. So is the record separate or is it part of UDHP? It's irrelevant. It's actually the connection between the data and the applications will go through the UDHP.
Okay.
So my label for what you're describing, Tomas, is in the short run, UDHPs really have to be dependent upon and complementary to EHRs.
Absolutely.
In the long run, they are competitive.
Yeah. I think the smart EHRs are going to be built on UDHPs going forward. The new ones. Absolutely.
Yeah, that I agree. Makes sense. It makes sense, Vince, to be able to do that because you can't, to Garish's point, you can't know what every hospital is not built the same. This is the benefit of a US healthcare is, you have maximum flexibility in terms of where you can go and get medical care, but it's also the biggest problem because everybody's providing healthcare using completely different systems. There's no commonality in most applications.
And even the ones that are using the same system cannot interoperate, which is
absolutely
it's tough. Right.
I got a question from Jim. Is there room for small to medium-sized digital health platforms that have been aggregating point solutions to move into the UDHP category?
I touched on that, Jose, when I said healthcare is so large that 18% of GDP would not be surprising to see sector specific or even subsector specific. As an example of that, Salesforce has a digital brochure saying to med tech companies, we ought to be your unifying platform.
And
I agree, Vince. I mean, I don't think this whole concept of a single thing that can do everything for everybody is real, right? So it's the use cases are so broad that every UDHP company starts somewhere and they're going to be good at some things and they're not going to be good at everything. So there is always going to be potential for, right? It's not going to be like point solutions today where there's hundreds of these, right? Definitely not that, but there's probably going to be room for a few, right, that are best at supporting certain types of use cases. Like even Jim, ServiceNow, the way I see it today, at least, most of the use cases are around kind of the operational aspects, right? Around the healthcare versus clinical aspects, clinical decision making, those kinds of aspects. So there's always going to be room for different focus.
And they basically stayed away from that. If you take a step back and look what they do, you could take the same platform and put it in life sciences. And then you would be looking for, well, is there a clinical trials application in there? And the answer is no, simply because they're now working with different kinds of systems to kind of get a drug through the process, manufactured and out the market. That's still operational, right? That's still where they want to play, if that's a way to describe it. It's a great point.
I got a comment here. To the extent that they allow for AI integrations, UDHPs may replace EHRs, but the trajectory for both is unknown until we start seeing successful AI integrations into these systems. This sorting out will take some time and many lawsuits. That's a comment, not a
It's probably true. Yeah.
So
And-
I'll comment on that comment. You know, what I foresee is AI is really creating a battle over the user interface. And I'll go back to the example that I used earlier where, you know, smartphone operating systems, in 2006, there were a dozen companies, and that narrowed down eventually to two. You know, who's going to develop the AI interface or AI interfaces for healthcare? And it could be EHRs, in which case, you know, that makes them much stronger. It could be large tech companies like the ones, several of the ones who are trying to become UDHPs, or I think even conceivably it could be, you know, an early stage startup company. But you know, if you get the AI interface right, whatever that looks like, whether it's voice or voice and something, I don't know, you know, that could well determine, you know, the winner in this race.
But Vince, don't you think we'll see this in other industries first? So I think one of the problems of healthcare, but also an advantage, is that we get to see what other industries have already done. And this is, I mean, healthcare is always behind. There's good reasons for that, obviously, but you know, the user interface issue, I think it's going to be solved in CRM before it is solved in DHR, I'm pretty sure. So we'll get a front
You
row
could well
seat.
be right. I'll
Yeah,
share an
because,
interesting statistic,
you know,
though, Tomas. Eugene Hardware did a survey across industries of how many companies were working on AI. And the number one industry, which shocked me, is healthcare. You know, 11,200
no, I fully agree.
AI
But
healthcare
we're talking about
companies.
the UI, right? The UI. So I fully agree.
Yeah.
Healthcare has many more.
I think you're probably right, Tomas. Yeah, healthcare was probably you know, going to be a follower, but
You know, the simpler
you know,
interface
but not
is the
100% sure.
consumer interface. So I think we'll see the first things being done there, and then slowly move into business applications.
Yeah.
I've heard this term from the NHS that they don't aspire to be the first mover, but a fast follower
Yeah,
of what's been done
it's
elsewhere.
probably an excuse in the case of NHS.
Tomas, it's all about cost. It's all about cost.
True.
It's all about cost.
We
Yeah.
have an open EHR versus fire comment.
Uh-huh. What is it?
Not a question, but a comment. I'm a clinician working full-time in health IT since 25 years. With regards to US, they've embraced Smart on Fire. So it provides a levy for clinicians to access multiple apps.
Yeah.
Existing EHR, like Epic Concern. Meanwhile, the EHR is kind of cool, but kind of like an open EHR platform as persistent layer, and the apps above working through Smart or Fire.
Yeah.
Gives them the freedom to use an app or substitute with a new one if they want.
No, that makes sense because the Smart on Fire is basically an integration, right? So that's where Fire really shines. So I fully agree. I mean, we actually use that as well. And we're actually doing an open air on Fire, so you can have an open air interface, but Smart on open air. But actually next week, there's the Fire guys and the open air guys are getting together in Amsterdam, and Graham Grieve and all these guys are coming together. And
Wow.
hopefully we get some good stuff out of that. It's Monday, I think.
Very promising, I agree.
And let's see. We have a comment about the ethics of taking data out of the EHR. Taking data out of EHRs or from sales data at pharmacies is not ethical. I agree that the health of the population is the issue. If the population of a country is better, then the buying and selling of data is not viable. I want to comment on that. And
no.
It's an issue, but I'm not sure how it's a unique issue here.
And how it's a UDHP issue.
Yeah.
I mean, at the core, UDHP is still going to try to make data more accessible. right? How you use the data is really, it's much broader. It's beyond the scope of the UDHP itself. The primary target would be application development to ease the workflows and put the patient at the middle of all this, right? So you make the life of the patient better, the life of the clinician better. But yeah, there's always going to be other use cases that's beyond control, right? That should be governed by other means.
Question for Tamaz. I missed what hospital system had implemented the inclusion of advanced care directives.
Yeah, it was the London UCP. So I put it in the chat, but I don't know if people
Oh,
see
you did.
be right.
Let's see. There's lots of comments, not of questions. And let's see. Did we want to talk about the voice interface more? I know you touched upon it, Vince, in your last about 2 comments before. Is there anything else we want to say about that?
I will add, the killer, if you look at where AI is being adopted in healthcare, it's really around ambient scribing. That's probably the killer application, and there's over, 100 companies doing that. That's a good, however, that is running in the background in the doctor-patient visit. It's eliminating the need for the interface for the clinician during their pajama time to have to, put extra information, or at least it limits the need for the clinician to create the summary at the end of the patient visit. But I think it's not the whole answer to the interface battle, the AI interface, but it's a partial answer, and it's certainly a good answer for that use case.
A huge time saver,
And to add to your thing, Vince, and look, if you look at some other use cases where AI is very effective today, is reporting, right? Radiology reporting, for instance, is another place, right, where it's really the documentation aspects where you're unnecessarily spending time interacting with the system. You can do a lot of that in an automated way. But the other type of use case where interface becomes relevant is data aggregation at the point of decision making. Right. So if you think of those kinds of situations, today it's a lot of clicks. If you ever want to get all the right data before you answer a diagnostic question, you're going to have to go to like 10 different screens in the EMR and pull up a whole bunch of things. And those are the areas where you can almost do it without an interface. That's the best interface for AI, is to not have an interface, because it knows what you're trying to do. It knows the context in which you're operating, and hence it's only pulling up the relevant data and making it available in front of you, right?
Yeah.
So that is ideally, if you think about AI, it has to be behind the scenes. It can't be like in front of you as an application, right? It has to do its job behind the scenes in context. And that's kind of how we're going to see these interfaces evolve. And it's going to be use case specific, of course.
Yeah. I got a question from Chad. So I'm going back in time here. Any success stories to share about integrations of biometric data? I know this keeps coming up, that biometric data from devices isn't very well integrated with the rest of healthcare. From personal devices like watches and Aura rings.
Well, I think it's like any data source. It's up to your healthcare provider and what they're looking for. All right. So we are almost there when it comes to high blood pressure monitoring. We're just not there yet at the moment, right? Nothing that's accurate. So continuously monitoring your blood pressure for those patients that have that kind of a condition. But certainly it is successful, for diabetics, who are, measuring the amount of insulin that's being injected, and all that data becomes part and parcel to the treatment program. And so it's up to the physician to kind of basically say that. So what are you trying to kind of accomplish with this? If you're a woman, you're pregnant, you want to kind of go through and do some monitoring that way. Physician says, I'll take that data and use it. Some say yes, some say no. So it depends largely, and I would put it on the medical device community to basically create those combination of devices and pharmaceutical treatments that kind of go hand in hand with it, because they will need something, right, along the lines of a watch to be able to monitor and then provide that data. But again, it's got to be FDA approved here in the US and tested and those types of things.
I
So
think
there
there's
are
a big
successful
difference
programs that way.
between, you know, what we call virtual care or you know, virtual wards, they call them in England, where you're actually monitoring patients, seriously monitoring patients as an extension of the hospital, right? Cuts cost, and for a number of patients, it's a much better option. But the personal devices, you know, like watches and all this, I've seen a lot of skepticism and how valuable that data is. And you really have to find the right physician that will, you know, look at that data for you. And it's not that easy. Obviously, they're very busy people. But for people that are managing a chronic disease and are part of a program that is managed by an extension of the physical ward, yeah, there's many examples like this all across England and the rest of Europe, quite a lot.
Right. I think the acute care use cases definitely warrant, right? So in terms of remote patient monitoring, the challenge though to keep in mind is what type of data are we talking about? Because there's a clear lack of standard when it comes to device data that is sent like in a time series fashion and all that. Most of the data we're dealing with are derived out of the device data that's coming in through that vendor's backend software, which tries to generate some kind of a report, which then feeds into your, you know, EMR system or whatever the system of intelligence is, right, into the workflow. But if you really want access to that time stream and the series data that's coming in for AI applications, I don't think there is good standards around those kinds of things today at all, right?
Absolutely.
I had a question here. Puts a smile on my face. Are there opportunities to get involved in the UDHP cause?
Like a movement.
It's recruiting, Vince. You're on mute. We
You're
didn't
on
hear.
mute there.
No. Okay. Let's see. I'm going to go here. Agree with Jim's takes on larger challenges in the U.S. Reminder, though, that the private. Agree with Jim's take. This is going back a bit. Which on the larger challenges in U.S. Reminder, though, that the private health insurance market, the payer for the majority of people, is regulated by every state individually, not the federal government, with some specific exceptions. So it's more complicated than just the competition between the healthcare systems and tech systems like EHRs. This is going back an hour. Sorry. You may not remember that, Jim. You said this. You said something about an hour ago. That's a comment on it.
Oh, yeah. Well, part of the, Tomas, the difference here in the U.S. is that at the end of the day, once you get your treatment program, U.S. patients will have to pay for this, right? So either it's covered by an insurance, it's covered by the government, a part of it's covered by the government, or you pay out of pocket, those kinds of things. And so anytime you use an insurance, the word payer pops into that conversation because depending on where you stand, that there regards to be some regulations there. Data from the EHR is then sent to the insurance company that verifies the treatment program, and then whether we pay it or not, we pay the full 100% or a portion of it. That's kind of how that process works. And again, European, there's a difference there with the European folks. So
yeah, and
I don't know if I answered it, but
I think it was a comment, not a question.
Yeah. Okay.
And unified platforms will include the patient healthcare consumer as seamlessly as tech such as Expedia. I think we are created tech with the patient in mind. That's a comment. And let's see, I'm going back. We may have caught up, because I'm not reading someone's resume. And should be nothing better than to direct. Okay, using AI in healthcare will be problematic due to inaccurate, untimely copy paste text box documentation of physicians and nurses. Let's see. I'm gonna go here. I think actually, questions are room for, no, we've done that. We may actually have We examined outside industry tech like Expedia, Trivago, Amazon, and Uber, and created. Okay, that's no. Sorry, guys. There's a lot of comments here that aren't really appropriate to read.
That's okay.
And we've got 12 minutes left in the after party. We are going to be distributing a replay. Are we going to make the slides available as well?
Sure, no problem.
Yes,
I'm going
you
to
can.
send it to everybody here. The replay, if you're wondering, oh, where's the replay? It's going to be in the event page, in the comments. I'm going to be spraying it everywhere on LinkedIn. And if I can find you in the reports and those, I can send you an email as well. Can we go to final word? Final word. Tomas,
Yeah,
do you have
that's
a
fine.
final word?
Well, I think it's exciting times. You know, as I've said before, I don't see many new EHRs. They're the ones that are out there are very old. I've yet to see the new Cerner one, but since it's done in a year, I doubt that it's very new. Even though it's obviously, as Larry puts it, it's completely rebuilt. But it takes time, obviously, right? So 20, 25-year-old software, yeah, I think it's ripe for change. And again, I speak from the European perspective. I fully agree that US is another beast with the incumbents, but in Europe, we are seeing change. We are seeing change. Mostly because for most vendors, EHR is not a good business. In Europe, in particular, they're failing. They're losing money. They're trying to do something. They don't have the advantage of the U.S. Scale and pricing, obviously. So that's why I see change and a lot. So yeah, I'm optimistic that this is going to come to the benefit of patients. Absolutely.
Jim,
Great.
final word.
Yeah. First of all, thank you, Vince and Jose. This is a good conversation here. Appreciate joining the panel and at least sharing a perspective on the architecture and platform and things like that. I think what we're really seeing as healthcare evolves is going to be largely around these AI agents. We're still, Tomas, in the US, there's a lot of hospitals that are operating at a 0 or a minus in terms of profitability. They're not supposed to have some things. They have to basically maintain their costs for things. But we're focused on productivity and then cost savings. And these AI agents will take the manual processes that are around the platform and remove them. So everything from appointment scheduling all the way out to, you know, different kinds of patient discharge services, they'll be replaced with an agent. And if that comes to fruition, that will actually make some changes happening here in the US market, because right now AI is being adopted by the clinicians themselves at a very rapid pace. They actually see that as a kind of like I'm a clinician and I've got my AI agent buddy sitting next to me, basically answering my questions and doing certain things for me. So, and it's happening across every single specialty program, radiology all the way across, radiology being the largest one where they're using AI quite a bit.
Yeah.
So time will tell. It'll be interesting. And again, the EHR, I don't see that changing. There's 5 players in the US. The top 2 we've been talking about, which is Oracle and Epic. But the 3 remaining players are still in business. They're still doing stuff. They're still getting acquired in hospitals because of the price point, right? It's just got a little lower price point, and it provides the same kind of capability. So
Jim, if it's any consolation, most of the hospitals in Europe are losing money as well. So
okay, I don't want to bring that up. But again, at the end of the day, it's still patient care. All of us on this call, all of us listening to this webinar, I mean, we all are going to get patient care for themselves or for a loved one. And we just want to make sure that, you know, they get the right kind of patient care. That's the bottom line.
Absolutely.
Thank you, by the way. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Nirish.
Yeah, look, again, thanks to this panel, and it was great discussion. Thanks to the audience for engaging and asking very thoughtful questions. And look, if there's one thing I'd leave you folks with, it's this, right? So UDHPs, they're not just a technical upgrade. It's almost like a strategic reset if you step back and think about it, right? And they gave us the foundation to connect people, systems, right, insights in a way that truly supports a very different type of patient-centered care, right? More modern, and where healthcare is going in general. And I think at the same time, for the innovators out there, the startups out there, the application developers out there, they open the door for faster deployment, right? Better integration, and actually being able to deliver better experiences at scale, right? That can work. And so I think it's just truly something that, something to look forward to. Now, how it takes shape is definitely going to be very different in Europe versus US versus emerging markets. And I would be surprised if the emerging markets actually take the biggest, fastest leap and wins, right? Because the legacy and the baggage isn't there in a lot of these things. We have seen this again and again in every industry, right? So, and the hardest one is always going to be the countries like US, which has, the dominant players, heavy investment into the legacy systems, and it's a hard thing to get out of. So, and the strategies might very well be different. And I think the momentum will come when the right applications have real impact on patient care and efficiency that makes the clinician population start pushing on some of these things, right? And that's the only way these changes happen. So
They say
how I
that
see it.
the reason that God could create the world in 7 days is he had no legacy.
That's a good
I
one.
was saying
Okay,
something about
fine.
that one.
Vince, final word.
Yeah, final word, especially in the US, it's very early. And I am gratified to see the interest and the engagement from the audience. As I talk with people in healthcare out there, there's not a lot of awareness yet of this trend. So I appreciate from you, Jose, and Tamaz, Jim, Girish, pointing out where this is going, where it's already alive and well, and maybe there needs to be a UDHP cause. So again, thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I want
Thanks,
to
Vince. Thanks for that.
thank Vince for helping me produce this webinar. And me and Vince have been on a marathon today. We actually did a webinar just before this one. We did webinars for 5 hours.
Oh, wow. You're a trooper, Vince. You didn't bring that other webinar into this at all. You focused on UDH and that was it.
Webinars are fun. And this one was definitely engaging.
Let's do this again someday.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Glad to do it.
Happy to help out here. Appreciate it.
Right.
Thank you.
And I want to thank the audience for all your questions.
Yay, audience.
And we'll be in touch with the replay. And I'm also going to chop up the webinar into little tiny pieces and sprinkle them like confetti all over LinkedIn. And take care, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.